My best friend announced she was pregnant with my husband's baby at my mother's funeral. I kept quiet until the DNA came back. My mother died on a Wednesday. The funeral was on Saturday. I thought the worst thing that day would be standing at the front of a church while relatives said the things people say. I was wrong. My best friend, Lena, stood up in the middle of the service and announced she was pregnant. She said it was my husband's baby. The room went silent, like someone had turned off the noise. People stared. My knees went weak. I married Mark 5 years ago. Lena and I met in college, and we were tight. She'd been at every holiday, every birthday, every bad job, breakup. She called me sister. Mark and I seemed solid. He worked long hours, came home late, but we texted and he never left dirty dishes in the sink. We appeared normal. Lena and I had a falling out 6 months before. Small fight, stupid reason. We made up. She moved back into my life and I told myself everything was okay. That lie felt foolish to remember after she stood at my mother's funeral and said pregnant with my husband's baby. People whispered. My aunt clutched my hand so hard it hurt. My father's face went white. Mark sat 2 rows in front of me and didn't turn around. He didn't need to know what had happened. Lena kept talking, smiling like she planned a surprise. She said she found out a few weeks ago. She said she knew I needed family now and she wanted to give the family something to celebrate. She said it like she was handing out cake. Before anyone could get louder, my cousin started yelling at her to stop. This wasn't the place. Lena laughed and said this was exactly the place because secrets were being kept in the house. After the service, my mother's friends surrounded Lena with hugs and congrats. My husband's phone stayed in his lap. My brother asked if he wanted to go outside. He said no. I drove home with the family. Nobody asked me how I was. People asked if I was okay in the way you ask someone when you already have your answer. At home, Lena hugged me and said in my ear I was going to be a great aunt. I felt a coldness I couldn't name and I didn't say anything. That night, I found messages on Mark's phone. He left it face down on the coffee table and forgot to lock it when he went to bed. It was a stupid mistake that felt like fate. I didn't read everything. I read enough. There were texts from Lena with kiss emojis, late night plans, and one that said, I'm scared but I love you. The timestamps matched nights. Mark worked late nights. He said he was working in the office. They had pictures of drinks at bars, selfies together, and a receipt from a hotel 2 towns over dated 3 months ago. The receipt showed a room charged to Mark's card. I didn't burst into the bedroom like a TV show. I sat on the couch and breathed slow so my hands wouldn't shake. I took screenshots. I saved them to a folder called Evidence. I did what I thought the right thing to do was. I didn't touch Mark. I didn't tell Lena to get out. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and sat in the dark until morning. The next day I asked Mark if he stayed late at the office because of a deadline. He said yes. He looked tired. He asked if I wanted coffee. I smiled and said yes. I poured him a cup and the cup felt like a lie. My hands were steady, but my voice didn't feel like mine. I called Lena and asked to meet for a walk. She said sure, like nothing had happened. We walked through the park and she told me about maternity clothes and how emotional she felt. She mentioned the funeral again, how beautiful it was, how people were so supportive. I said nothing and let her talk. When she hugged me, I felt the hotel receipt burning through my pocket. I did not tell her I had her messages saved. 2 days later, I took Mark out for dinner. I told him we needed to talk. I didn't tell him what I knew. I asked open questions and watched his face. He told me about the stress at work, about a mentor who might retire, and how that could mean a promotion. He sounded tired. I wanted to ask him about the receipt. I wanted to throw the phone and make the truth land like a wrecking ball. I didn't. Instead, I set a plan in motion. I told him I wanted a paternity test for something small and stupid, something my mother had joked about years ago when she said our family liked to settle things with DNA. He laughed and said fine. He teased me and kissed my cheek. He said he trusted me. I held my laugh in. I booked a private lab appointment. I called Lena and said I wanted to celebrate the baby news with a brunch. She agreed and sent me a picture of a tiny onesie she thought was cute. She looked radiant in it. The ring I had given her 5 years ago was still on her finger even though she claimed it was my husband's child. At brunch, Mark sat at the end of the table. He acted awkward. He kept touching his phone. He whispered to Lena once, and she answered with an eye roll. I watched them arrange their hands on the table like children testing a truth. After coffee, I slipped out and went to the lab with a friend. I told her only that I needed a checkup and she waited in the car. I gave blood. I kept my mouth shut. I signed papers with my name. I asked for expedited processing and paid in cash. The lab gave me a receipt and a reference number. I put it in my bag. I did everything I could to look like a normal person ordering a latte and not a person about to split the whole world open with a test. That night, Lena sent me a scan from her OB. The ultrasound had little grainy shapes and a date that matched when she'd said she found out. She had circled the heartbeat and written, I'm so happy. The file name showed it had been printed at a clinic in our town. I saved the image and matched the dates to the messages. I kept everything. My mother's memorial kept expanding into people wanting to be involved. Pictures were shared. Toasts were made. Life insurance forms had to be signed. The money mattered. The funeral had cost money we didn't have. Small voices in the family began asking about how things would be handled. Mark said nothing. Lena said nothing. I said nothing. Elsewhere, my sister sent me a text asking if I'd heard about Lena's pregnancy. I said yes. She said people were already asking if Mark would marry her. I put down my phone and felt my chest tighten. The test results from the lab arrived 2 days later in a sealed envelope. I picked them up myself. I waited until after dinner to open the envelope. Mark asked me if something was wrong. I said no and sliced the envelope with the corner of my thumb. The page inside had a code and a line that read, Paternity Index Pending. I almost laughed out loud. Pending. The world held its breath with that one word. I forwarded a copy to a lawyer friend without comment, and then I sent the lab the DNA kit for Mark. He agreed to do it because he trusted me. He swore he had been faithful. He put his swore on the table like a weapon. He was lying, and I knew it. But I wanted proof beyond messages, receipts, and smiles. I wanted the line connecting the dots to be printed in black and white. While we waited, my mother's will reading was scheduled. My family gathered at the lawyer's office. Lena came too and sat 2 chairs away from me. She held her stomach and laughed at things people said. When it was my turn to address who would handle the memorial donations, Lena interrupted with a story about how she and I used to bake with my mother. She said I was my mother's favorite. People laughed. I kept quiet. The lab emailed me the confirmation that Mark's sample had been received. The code matched my reference. I felt like someone watching a slow-moving train crash that you couldn't stop. I kept walking, doing laundry, making lists, and no one else saw the crack in my face. Then one morning my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. It was the lab. "Your results are in," they wrote. I closed my eyes and let the screen go dark. I sat at my kitchen table and put my forehead in my hands. This was the part where you decide to be brave or to run. I chose brave. I opened the PDF. There it was. Paternity probability 99.99%. The name Mark next to a code. My throat closed. I read it again. I looked for a typo. There was none. I felt sick, like I'd been punched in the gut, and then like a different blow hit, because now the pieces fit. Not only had Mark been with Lena, he was the biological father. I started at the paper and then walked to my bedroom. Mark was there making the bed like nothing had changed. He said in that small, calm voice he used when he wanted me to trust him that he was proud of me for planning everything for the memorial. He didn't see my face. He didn't know my lungs couldn't work. I set the paternity test down on his pillow and left without a word. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I put my keys in my pocket and walked out. I drove to my mother's grave and sat on the grass. People passed by and said, "I'm sorry." I said nothing because words felt like weapons I didn't want to give him. I called my lawyer friend and said I needed to meet. She told me calmly to bring everything I had. She asked if I'd like her to call Mark and Lena. I said not yet. I wanted one clean thing to be mine before I exploded the rest. She agreed. She said she could get a temporary restraining order or lock down accounts. I said think first, act next. For 2 days, I watched Mark and Lena closely. They ate breakfast together. They laughed at stupid jokes. They held hands when they thought I wasn't looking. I kept a calendar of their movements. I texted my sister that I needed her to watch my niece for a week. She said of course. I booked a small hotel for 2 nights and slept there to plan. I called my mother's accountant and asked about the estate. I asked for copies of everything. I told them I was cleaning out her house. On the 3rd day, I called my parents and told them to come over. My father came with boxes of old photos. He talked about things that didn't matter. He said we should all be calm and not tear the family apart. My mother, my stepmother sat quiet and cried when my dad said this. I let them sit there and I let my mind build the speech I'd been rehearsing in silence. When everyone was at the house, I put the paternity results on the kitchen table. I didn't say anything. Lena didn't look at the paper. Mark's face changed like someone had ripped the skin off his chest. He stepped back and said he couldn't believe it. He said he wanted to explain. He stumbled over words and shook his head and asked for time. My sister asked if this was a joke. My father whispered, "You son of a bitch," and I could hear the way it surprised him that the word came out of his mouth. My mother scolded me for reading Mark's messages. I said I didn't need to read anything else. This was the proof. Lena finally spoke. She said she was sorry, but she loved Mark and they didn't mean to hurt me. My father told her she should be ashamed of herself. She cried and said she hadn't known about the funeral. She said she didn't plan the timing. My mother told her to leave the house. She stumbled to the door. Mark found his voice and said he didn't know how it happened. He said it was a mistake. He said he'd never meant to hurt me and he swore he'd make it right. He begged for forgiveness in the way people beg when they think money or time will fix what's broken. My dad hit the table. He shouted that Mark had betrayed all of us. I felt tired. I told everyone to stop. I said that yelling wouldn't change what was true. I said I needed a moment alone with Mark. He looked at me with those tired eyes and said, "Please don't do this here." I said I needed him to remember what he'd done and why it mattered, and if he wanted to explain, do it like a grown man in front of everyone who cared about him. He stared at me and then he sat down and told a small truth. He admitted he'd slept with Lena twice over the past 3 months. He said he regretted it. He said he tried to stop and couldn't. He said he'd never considered the baby because he thought it was impossible for Lena to get pregnant. He said he didn't want to lose me. He said those words, and I watched them break against the paper on the table. The lawyer friend told me quietly we had choices: divorce, separation, protect the estate. She said I could get sole custody of the house and the dog. She said she could file for emergency support. She asked if I wanted to go to the hospital to get checked or to talk to a counselor. I said no. I wanted to go home and sleep in my own bed and not have someone else's body next to mine. That night, Mark packed a bag and left. He kissed me on the forehead like he was asking for mercy, and then he closed the door behind him. Lena left town the next morning. She texted me a long thing about how she was so sorry and how she should have told me. I didn't reply. Months passed in a blur. The estate matters sorted out. The funeral donation fund got handled. Mark and I separated. He moved into a small apartment. I stayed in the house and slept in my mother's room for a while. I went to therapy and cried and learned to make food for one. I told myself 1,000 times I wouldn't let the betrayal define me. On a late winter afternoon, their lawyer sent a message saying Lena's pregnancy had been complicated and there had been a scare. Mark wanted me to know he was helping. I blocked his number. I didn't want to hear update. DNA had given me proof, and it had freed me not because I wanted to punish, but because I needed the truth to stop pretending everything was okay. That truth made space for me to grieve, honestly, for anger that had been quiet to get loud. I had kept quiet at my mother's funeral because I didn't want to make her memorial a spectacle. I kept quiet because I wanted to be sure before I ruined everything with a claim. The DNA had come back and the world had split. I had choices then and I chose to leave. The house smelled like my mother's perfume for weeks. I still visit the cemetery and tell her what I am doing. I tell her about the kitchen I painted, the garden I started, the friends who visit on Sunday afternoons and bring wine. I tell her I'm okay. I don't know if Mark and Lena will ever find what they're looking for. I don't know if they will learn or just move on to a life of small justifications. I do know I stopped waiting for them to fix themselves. I stopped holding my breath in case they needed me to prove their humanity. I used the paper with the lab stamp to close a door. Months after the funeral, someone asked if I forgave them. I said not now, maybe not ever. That was honest and enough. The DNA was a line on a page, but it was also permission to stop pretending. I still miss my mother. I still have days where grief is a hard thing to swallow. But I sleep alone in my bed and my closet is mine. I open the mail and decide what stays and what goes. I make plans that don't involve other people's apologies. I live now with the small, blunt truth I asked for. The test proved what was happening, and I chose myself when it did.